Okay, so here we are for the directions for the Cold War game. This sheet is probably double-sided with this game on one side and the second game, Surviving a Nuclear Attack, on the back. So this game is played with two people. We have somebody playing the role of the Soviet Union, and they operate on this track. And then we have somebody playing the role of the United States, and they operate on this track. Landing on these spaces, not much happens other than what the information provides you with, and the directions are simple. You're going to roll, and let's say the Soviet Union goes first. Let's say they get a 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. You will put an SU indicating that Laos has fallen to the Soviet side. The US then goes, let's say they get a 2, 1, 2. You then put a US indicating that Cambodia has fallen to the US side. They roll again. Let's say they get a 4, 1, 2. Count the space, 3, 4. Cuba has now fallen to this side. That's pretty much it. Now, let's just say this US gets a 2, then Laos no longer becomes on the side of the Soviet. It now falls to this side. And what you want to do is play this game for 5 minutes and make a determination about a winner based on how many one side is able to influence on the other side. And if you're thinking that game is stupid, that's nice, because the conclusion here is that is pretty much what the Cold War is about. The Cold War is about the US and the Soviet Union going around the world trying to influence one nation to their economic system, their ideology, and their way of life. So when we're looking at this image here, I just came up with a pretty bad map of the world, and I would ask you to just simply count up the capitalist and the communist sides, and that's how you determine a winner. You know, if the US has 30 and they have 29, then it looks like this side is easily winning the Cold War. The problem is, with the Cold War, you always have the fear of nuclear annihilation. That is the added bonus for the Cold War. Nuclear annihilation is always on the mind of the two sides fighting this conflict, which brings up this next game. So let's say in my prior scenario, one side is losing too many nations to their side, to the opposite side, and that forces one side to launch a nuclear bomb. So this game here is designed to see how that plays out. So you start off here. Everybody has a certain amount of health points. As the directions indicate here, you have 100, and you just roll to see what happens at each space. So if I get a 3, 1, 2, 3, I find a wounded dog suffering. I subtract 10 health points. So now I'm subtracting 10, which leaves me with 90. And then I kind of keep going on through these spaces based on what I roll. Now keep in mind, when you get here, you then need to finish with whatever the information is here, and then it'll let you know. If you are at a 0 or a negative, then you pretty much did not survive the nuclear attack. And that is how this game is played. If you're wondering this is dumb, well, that pretty much outlines the Cold War. Well, what do you learn about the Cold War after playing this game? Actually, both games. So let's talk a little bit about the Cold War. This is the definition that I am going with. It is a ideological war from 1917 to 89. That is a reference to the time when the Russian Revolution takes place. And, depending on the historian you're asking, they probably will have conflicting views about when the Cold War starts. For the most part, historians will say that it's World War II with the Iron Curtain speech, things going on in Germany. For me, 1917, there's been tension between the U.S. and the Russian side since the Russian Revolution. So I'm going to start it with 1917. As we go on with the definition, it is a war that is fought directly through policies and indirectly in other nations. So for the Cold War, you have to have an understanding of what I mean by direct and indirect fighting. So direct fighting would pretty much mean the United States going to war with Russia. They get their army, they get their tanks, and they pretty much go at it to see which side annihilates the other. That is direct. The problem here is that both sides eventually have a nuclear bomb, and with both sides in possession of a nuclear bomb, the fear of nuclear annihilation and destruction of everybody through what becomes known as mutually assured destruction. Everybody agrees to destroy each other, and the entire planet goes bye-bye because our ideological differences are more important than a planet. We want to try to avoid direct war, and that is pretty much what the Cold War is about. It's avoiding, but you have to always meet the other side on the battlefield. And sometimes the battlefield is in the United Nations. Sometimes it's in a stupid hockey match. Sometimes it's in the Olympics when you're going up again. It doesn't matter. The Cold War is being fought everywhere and anywhere. Let's take a look at indirect. So how would indirect fighting take place? So here we're going to use the fake nation that I'm labeling any nation. Here we have any nation. Let's say in any nation there's a civil war, there's fighting, there's a potential overthrow of the government. One side could suggest getting aid from the capitalist side, and this side, maybe they get aid from the communists. If you're the US, you want to make sure that you are giving money and weapons to ensure that this side wins over this side. The problem is the Soviets are probably going to match you dollar for dollar, soldier for soldier, weapon for weapon, and that is going to create what's known as a stalemate. So for the most part, you want to make sure that you are fighting the other side through direct or indirect. Again, wherever and anywhere this opportunity provides, that's what you want to focus on. Here are a couple of other terms that are specific for this class. We've already went over the Cold War. So the act-react relationship is this particular image right here. The act-react relationship is what I use in the Cold War section. We have the US and Russia. Now keep in mind I use Russia, the Soviet Union. There's a debate, you could use these interchangeably, but when we think about Russia, we're talking about Russia. When we think about the Soviet Union, we're thinking about Russia and all of the areas that Russia has influence over, primarily in Eastern Europe. So that would mean, all of Russian sphere of influence. Anyway, so the act-react, what I want you thinking about here is the United States does something and the Russians would have to do something. Because if they don't respond and the United States has just done something, then the Soviets would lose to this particular on this issue. So you always want to respond to the response. So the U.S. does something that gets the Soviets to react. So now it's placed the ball on the side of the U.S. Now it is in their court. So now they're going to have to do something. So the U.S. is going to have to react to this action. And of course, this action was a reaction to this action here. And you just kind of want to go back and forth. And this could be so many things that happen. I don't know, use a couple of examples here. Let's say that Russia invades Afghanistan. The United States has to do something, and what can they do? Well, they could support the Mujahideen, and they could give the Mujahideen weapons. So now the Mujahideen has weapons, and now that puts the Soviets in a situation where they have to continue to fight this particular war, because if they lose, then there goes some loss to their prestige and their empire. The problem with the Cold War is this is where it gets tricky. You want to keep pushing the other side, but you don't want to push them too far. And the 9.5 is a reference to how far you probably want to push them. So you want to push them a little bit, but you don't want to push them too far where the individual maybe falls on the ground, clear loss, where they decide, you know what, I am just going to push this button, and this button is attached to this nuclear bomb, and this nuclear bomb is going to blow up in one of your major cities, taking your entire country and destroying it through nuclear annihilation. Hence the board game, surviving a nuclear attack. So you always want to push the one side, but you don't want to push them too far during the Cold War. You just want to push them enough, because if you don't respond, you're losing. And that's what the 9.5 references. And so for this one, the snowball, it's just looking at how any one particular event, like a snowball, going down a hill, getting larger, can kind of escalate in the end, could be, once again, nuclear annihilation. So you always want to try to avoid that. The snowball is just looking at how any small event can potentially lead to nuclear annihilation and conflict. Let's go to the next term for the class, indirect fighting. So here I have a visual, two sides fighting. Again, when I use the reference to any nation could be any nation. It could be Vietnam, it could be Cambodia, it could be Laos, it could be Afghanistan, it could be Libya, it could be Ghana. It doesn't matter. Wherever there is a situation where there is a potential upheaval in any particular country, if the United States is going to give these individuals money and weapons and the Soviet does not, then that increases the likelihood that one side is going to fall to communism and the other one is not, or the other one's going to fall to capitalism. It doesn't matter. So So it is in your best interest, if you're going to win this Cold War, finding an indirect method to make sure that you are giving money and weapons to the one side to ensure that that one particular side wins, because if they don't, you are going to lose the Cold War, because remember, this is all about trying to see how many you can influence on your side. So if the Russians have influenced 29 and you have only 20, then that means that they are winning the Cold War. What is the gap? The gap is 9, because they have 9 territories to their side in comparison to yours over here. So that is the gap, and this is the way you can determine a winner. They have 9 over you. Anyway, blowback. Blowback is a term that comes out later in the Cold War. It's real easy to understand. It's when your choices you make today come back at a later date to haunt you. And the perfect example is this. In 1979, Russia would attack Afghanistan. Afghanistan would seek aid from the United States. One of those individuals would be an Islamic nationalist from Saudi Arabia who would go to Afghanistan to fight along with a guy by the name of Abdullah Azzam. Abdullah Azzam, after the Soviet-Afghan War, would later be killed, and the person leaving Saudi Arabia would take Azzam's vision and create an organization called Al-Qaeda. So sometimes the choices you make today come back to haunt you in the future, and that is blowback. And the Cold War is full of examples of blowback. That is the introduction on the Cold War. That's it.